All right, guys. Anthony with Austin Historical Weapons Guild here with Andreas, again hanging out in Vigilante. And again, tonight we're picking up more of Jude Lew, Das Fechtbuch, as seen in Yellow and Blue. We left off last time starting on page 111 from this. It looks like 10V, the 10 Versi side, is the starting point. So from the original text, in all windings, learn to find opportunities to strike, thrust, cut. Also check for strikes, thrusts, or cuts in every encounter if you want to fool the masters. This is a very simple interpretation and explanation of the three wounders. So the gloss is, know that you shall skillfully in every winding at the sword. For every winding has three different pieces, a strike, a thrust, and a cut. And whenever you wind at the sword, you shall consider and take heed not to do the pieces that belong to the winden incorrectly. Do not strike when you shall thrust, do not cut when you shall strike, do not thrust when you shall cut. Thus you shall always find the correct piece that has to be executed rightfully in every encounter and every binding of the swords, if you want to fool the masters and trick those who oppose you. How many windings there are and how you should execute them, you will find in the last piece of the notes, which say, who hangs well. So basically, this is a kind of precursor to something they're going to talk about later. So with that in mind, I'll kind of demonstrate what they're talking about to my understanding. But again, this is based purely on my background knowledge, not anything the book talks about. So with longsword, with most weapons, we have three ways of attacking the other person, right? Pretty straightforward. We have a thrust, where I take the point and put it in the other person. We have a cut, which we use the weak of the sword, the last third, however you want to break that down there. And then we have a slice, which is using the bottom half of the sword to kind of press and move and drive through. And the point here is that, knowing distance, knowing range, knowing that a thrust will be at the furthest range. From here, I can thrust him, but I definitely can't cut. But at the same time, if I'm here and I'm in cutting range, a thrust may just get stuck and not actually drive in, may not come through, and so on. So this is really about knowing the different attacks you can do, knowing the different ways to attack and how to apply them to your fencing so you can be skillful and always be able to apply them and defend against them as everything's moving forward. So this is applied from the windings. Remember from last time, windings are kind of when you're in the bind here. And one of my favorite kind of hand wave lazy explanations for winding is cross or uncross your hands. So right now my hands are uncrossed. If I want to wind, all I have to do is cross my hands. And I can wind from there. If here my hands are crossed, I can wind by uncrossing my hands. And use these instances, right? Because if I'm this far away, I can uncross with a thrust. If I'm a little bit closer, I'd uncross with a cut. If I'm closer yet, I'd uncross and try to bind and slice and move from there. So this is stuff that they'll dig into more later, but it's definitely good baseline starting work to get into things before we start. Building off of this, know the four openings so you can strike surely without any danger, without doubt, regardless of his behavior. So this is, again, cautioning against swinging at the sword. So from the gloss, this means when you come to the opponent in the Zufechten and you want to fence safely, you shall especially not strike towards the sword. You shall aim to the four openings. These are the right and the left sides above the belt of the man. The other two openings, left and right side below the belt. Choose one of these openings and strike boldly. Do not care what he fences against you. If he displaces, then work instantly in the displacement to the nearest openings. Also pay attention to the body and not to the sword. So again, iterating that we should be fencing our opponent, not their weapon. And this is said multiple ways by multiple different sources. But the main thing is here, if Andreas is cutting at me, I don't want to be cutting at his blade, right? Lots of reasons about that. Lots of things we can kind of dig into there. Likewise, if I'm swinging at him and he's like in a more point forward position, right? I don't want to enter by cutting at his weapon. I should say, cool, I'm going to hit him on his left shoulder, my right side. I'm going to come in and go like this, because that's going to make him displace. And once he does this, I can attack to the next side, work the next openings from there. Worth mentioning, they talk about the belt of the man. They're talking your natural waist. So up here, right underneath your ribs, not at your hips. So this is a much a point that's worth mentioning that when they talk about your natural waist, you're up here. This is your divider left, right, and you're sitting here under your ribs at your solar plexus, that general area, not down here where we wear belts nowadays. So definitely something to keep in mind as you're looking for this, looking for that. Going on to the next one, and now it gets back to being interesting again, I promise. All right, so to avenge yourself, break 4 openings masterly. Above duplier, below rightly mutier. I tell you indeed. Nobody can defend himself without danger. If you understand this, he will hardly come to striking. So, when someone strikes to you in earnest and you want to take revenge, break the opening skillfully. Thus, he is beaten involuntarily. Make the duplier against the strong of the sword, and the mutier against the weak. I will tell you this, he will neither be able to defend against the strikes, nor will he be able to strike by himself. So make the duplier and follow. When he strikes above from his right shoulder, then strike also from your right shoulder simultaneously and strongly above to his head. If he places the strike with strength, go up instantly with your arms and push your pommel with your left hand under your right arm. Strike him with the long edge from crossed arms behind the blade of his sword on the head. So there's a lot to unpack. Let's kind of start into that. So first thing is he's cutting from his right. He's acting first. Is worth mentioning and noticing as we're digging into this. My reaction is to be the same, cut from my right side, but he's going to displace strongly. So and I'm going to go up with strength, or go up, instantly up with your arms and push your pommel underneath. All right, so we'll set up the first plays a few times, see how this plays out. So he cuts in first. I cut in against him from above to his head. So we're here. So again, we'll set that up one more time, just to set the feeling up. He cuts in. I cut in strongly from above to his head. So a nice hard bind. We're both engaging with strength, with power. So from the gloss, from the text, I'm going to bring my hands up and turn underneath. And bring my long edge to his head, working from there. So again, a little bit more speed. He cuts, I cut, and I immediately come up and turn and not split his head open, because I like him a little bit. So just checking on the gloss one more time. So go instantly up with your arms, check. Push your palm with your left hand under your right arm, striking him with the long edge from crossed arms behind the blade of his sword on his head. Right, so nice and slow, talking through it. He cuts at me, I cut at him. We're both pushing strongly. Notice we're in a nice strong to strong bind here, for good or ill. We can talk about that some other time. I should instantly, as soon as this bind happens, as soon as I feel this pressure, I take my hands up and I push my pommel under my arm. So now if my arms are crossed, check, my long edge, check, his head. And notice this motion keeps me perfectly safe. He's pressing, he's gotten stuck in my cross guard, he's pressing through, and the more he pushes in, the harder I smack him in the side of the face. So one more time before we move on. He cuts at me, I cut, up, turn. And right there. And we're polite. So that is the duplier from Jude Lew, right? Noticeably different from what I've been doing or been taught or shown, I don't even remember anymore, is he's definitely lifted the hands up to make the turnout, where I've definitely kept mine a little bit lower, a little more pressed forward. So definitely things to take out and improve as you move through. All right, so item. Or else, if you have bound your sword from your left side with the long edge against his sword, then go up instantly with your arms and stay at the sword. Strike him with the short edge behind the blade of his sword on the head. So this is kind of inferring a little bit. So we're setting up the same thing. We're still doing a duplier, but this time instead of from the right, we're doing it from the left. This doesn't say if he's cutting from the right or from the left. It doesn't give his setup at all. The general assumption, I imagine, is that we're both cutting from our left side. Whether that means we start from our left shoulder to make this cut, or we just cut kind of a twisted cut, doesn't really matter. For the sake of ease, I like to start from right shoulder anyway. and just start goofy foot. So I'll start right foot forward. So when I step, I cut out from my left, and it makes it a much easier motion for myself. So as he cuts in, I cut from my left. Again, I'm going to go up. I'm going to twist and come through. So he comes through again. He cuts. Here, up, turn, and dropping that through. So real quick, just to confer that we're doing this correct. Go up instantly with your arms, stay on the sword, striking the short edge behind the blade of a sword on the head. So there's nothing about crossing or uncrossing arms, there's nothing about pommels. We've taken that core idea of this duplieren. So back to the first one. This idea of this duplieren, we've done this cut, we've made this bind. I go up and I turn out to strike with my long edge to here. So now we're going to say, okay, so you have that idea. That is the duplieren. That's like the core concept of, right? We have this hard, rigid bind. I twist, go high, and I make a strike to his head from behind his weapon. I don't disengage. I don't change sides. I just change which side I'm cutting from, but I'm staying behind and attached to his weapon. So if we take that idea to the opposite side, as he cuts, again, nice strong bind. I'm going to bring my hands up. And again, to get that kind of power to actually do a strike, I'm going to uncoil my hands here and strike from there, coming in. And notice he stays attached to my sword. He's engaged. He helps feed this cut and drives us into him. For thoroughness, I don't think this is going to work out, but just to see how it plays out, we'll have Andreas cut from the right. So he'll do a normal cut, and I will cut from my left the same way to try to recreate some sort of bind, just kind of see what happens, to see when to start playing with it. I don't expect this will work. I expect this will go counter to what the play is going to detail, just because we're not going to get that strong bind unless he reacts. But maybe he will, and maybe it'll set something up for us. So it's always worth playing with these things and seeing what happens, and really just experimenting as you, especially going through a book, either by yourself or for the first time, or just revisiting it, just to get an idea of what happens, what gets set up, and how to play things from there. So he's going to cut a normal cut. I'm going to cut from my left. All right. So if he, right. So first, I've got to get this nice strong cut towards him. So he's aborted his cut to make this pressure here. This almost makes this easier, assuming he stops and he's like this, because now this twist is even stronger, right? It may look slightly more dangerous with those arms exposed, but as he's cut in, as he's redirected his cut from my left to right down to the center to kind of intercept my cut that's coming in behind his sword, right, as I'm here, he's now pushing this way offline to my left. So as I make this motion, yes, I'm kind of bringing it towards my wrist, but his pressure is still going out away from me towards the camera, not towards my body. So it definitely still kind of works, though it definitely does assume an action from my opponent that doesn't quite match the same. Because if he didn't react, he was the less skilled fencer, and he throw that cut, so nice and slow, right, I would just displace him and cut through. So it does work that way better than I expected, and it definitely kind of assumes your opponent. I mean, we should always assume our opponents are competent and capable fencers. Otherwise, why are we training this? But kind of plays off of that from there. All right, so moving on, doing into the mutieren. So item, do the mutieren as follows. If you strike strongly above from your right shoulder, so notice I'm going first this time, and he displaces, being weak with his sword, wind your short edge to your left side at his sword, and go well up with your arms. Hang your point above, over his sword, and go up with your arms. Thrust to him to the other opening. So there's a lot to unpack in that. All right, so if you strike strongly above from your right shoulder and he displaces, so he isn't cutting, or at least isn't explicitly cutting, he's just displacing, whether he cuts to displace or he just tries to hold out and make a parry. But it's vastly different than how duplieren started, with both people making cuts. So from there, being weak with his sword, wind your sword edge to your left side at his sword and go well up with your arms. I don't really know what being weak with his sword means, so we'll kind of start playing with that and see how that starts to fan out.
Doesn't it just mean I give or I don't press super hard?
But none of your pairing. So Andrea's asking, I don't know if Andrea shows up in audio, so feel free to let us know. But he's saying like, so there's the idea of the strong and weak of the blade, which is purely based on physical characteristics of, where you are from the cross. But then you can be strong and weak in the bind. So he's asking like, if I throw a cut and here, he's saying if he's just weak with this, well, I should just hit him. So it's not inherently just that he hasn't made a strong bind. So it could be that, or it could be I've displaced him a little bit and he hasn't made a strong parry, so I can't do these things. So it's kind of an interesting phrase to kind of dissect and try to understand. So as I cut at him, he comes out with a parry. So from here, he's kind of not really weak with the sword, but I don't have a lot to do. So I'm going to go up, getting my short edge on, and then I thrust low from there. Right? I believe that was akin to those words. So we'll see how that kind of matches up with our description. So wind your short edge to your left side at his sword. And go well up with your arms. So hang your point above over his sword and go up with your arms. Going up with my arms twice. All right. So from the top, if you strike strongly above from your right shoulder and he displaces, being weak with his sword, wind your short edge to your left side at his sword and go well up with your arms. Hang your point above over his sword and go up with your arms. Thrust to him to the other openings. So maybe there's like 2 levels of this elevator of going up with my arms as we go through this. So I come to my cut, he displaces it. He is weak in the whatever that means from here. So I'm going to wind my short edge and go up with my arms. I'm going to hang my point low and go up with my arms. Then I'm going to stab him to the other opening. So there kind of was 2 stops on the elevator, surprisingly, as I drive in. And this is going back to the 3 wounders, the methods to attack, right? I know I want to make a thrust, so I need to really get my weapon up and away as I do this. So as I cut in, I'm going to go short edge and up. Right, I'm just bringing this to my left side for right now. I'm not going super high. I'm just coming from here, short edge and high. And I'm going to go higher and hang this over and bring this down. And I will say, thinking of this as 2 actions keeps my hands safer than the first run through we did. Because when I did the first run through, so you can see on the video, there's just some light contact across my arms, so we can duplicate that. So as I cut in, if I just kind of go here and wind, this, I'm getting a lot of blade contact on the back of my hands here. But if I really think about raising up twice, as I throw my cut, I go up once, up again. Now I've really displaced and locked his weapon. Look how much farther back and away his weapon is from me. And he's completely tied up as I'm doing this, as I drop through. So it's definitely something that you can make this one smooth motion, right? I can definitely, as I drill this, as I practice this, I cut in, I just go up super high and bring this down. That gives me the same effect of deflecting his sword way back and moving through. But it's definitely a different intention, different feeling. So him calling that out twice kind of implies to me, tells me that we should be driving up twice to that second stop. So I cut in, raise it to the left side. So this is basically just ox, nice, simple, normal. I can even kind of woggle in front of his face a little bit, but this he's going to put away, right? If I try to push this in, he's got a bunch of options to take that away from me. So maybe I don't want to do that. So instead, as I cut in, I go to ox, then I go higher, and trap him. Now his sword is really tied up. He's got a point in his ribs. And notice, I'm just at the lower opening. So we talked about this is where his natural waist is, and I'm coming in right below that. I'm not aiming for a leg. I'm not aiming for the crotch. I'm not going after the groin. Just right below those ribs into that lower opening, the lower section there. All right, so are we in time? We'll do this last, the second Mutiaran one before we wrap it up for the night. And just like with the Dupliaran, we're doing it from the left side. Or else, if you strike with the long edge from your left side at his sword, notice now we're striking at his sword, right? Go up with your arms and stay with the same edge at the sword and go after the lower opening. Thus, you can form two pieces from every strike according to your sensing the weak and strong of the sword. So it's definitely sounding like Andreas' interpretation, that idea that when he's being weak on the sword, that we've kind of overpowered his bind, that he's not nearly as strong as they were in that first one with the Dupliaran. So striking from the left side, going up with your arm, staying with the same edge on the sword, and go after the lower opening. So we'll play with that a little bit. I'm going to try this with the same two-step action that we did with the previous one. So right, this is still a Mutiaran. We're still doing the same things. They gave us the framework on the first play. So even though the second one doesn't say the exact same thing, because it's still a Mutiaran, because it's still that concept of taking advantage of him being weaker in the bind than me, so I'm going to kind of press in and press super high and lock him up. This also, in its own way, harkens back to what we talked about last week with whoever goes to war above gets shamed below. If I'm able to drive him high, whether by manipulating through attacking openings, which is the last plays we talked about, or Mutiaran, where I'm just pushing him up, I'm not going to strike high because I've already gotten everything of him up there. I'm going to wound low. So working from the left side, again, I'm going to start goofy foot cutting from my right shoulder because I'm lazy or just a bad cutter. You can be the judge. So as I cut in, so he's weaker in the bind, same thing, I'm going to go up to the ox-like position. I'm going to drive up higher and really just drive this in nice and low. So this feels super secure, super safe. I've got him locked and pressed out well above anything he can deal with, and I can drive through. So again, cutting from the left as I cut in. So if I don't press through and I just kind of drive this